They walk in that room, they become yours. And you got this energy inside your soul that says, I am the number one determinant of the success or failure of my students. Hey, y'all, when you get back, kick some butt. I'll see you in the winner's circle, celebrating your victory. Let's go. 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 Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's go. Let's go. Thank you, everybody.
And we are live. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to week 161 of the virtual AP Leadership Academy. Let me see who we got here on this beautiful Saturday morning here in Cancun, Mexico. We have John Few in the building, Ricardo Yanis, Takesha Hyde, Tashika Truesdale, Rodney Richardson, Marsha Poe. Man, I got an echo in this room, but we're going to make it work. We got Altravis Parks. We got, where we at? We got Dr. Rachel. Man, I know I'm going to mess your name up, Doc. You're going to have to tell me because you're going to be on with me soon. Idoho Eckett. I tried, Dr. Rachel. I tried. Mike Van Winkle II. Dr. Demetrius Scott's in the building. Dr. Sheikah Houston. Portia Ojigbo is in the building. Principal Otis Kitchen II. Anthony St. John is in the building. Principal Dot McKeever Jeter. Yolanda McKinney getting ready to start that AP position. Tiana Rodriguez is in the building. Dr. Principal Tammy Taylor is in the building. Principal Karen Fletcher is here. Melissa Jones Chunu is here. John Hurix, I see you. Rashad Davis, I see you. Michael Benton, Principal Michael Benton, we're gonna keep that title forever. Mike, I see you. Christopher Mono, I see you. Jocelyn Nelson is in the building. Lysandra Brackens, Cammie Berry. Hey, somebody hit that share button. Let them know we are here, man. We are here. Hit that share button, hit that retweet, hit that repost. As a matter of fact, if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We hit 18,000 this week, but I'm striving for 20,000 subscribers. So hit that button. We got Josh Tovar, MPA Jaguars. He said, not quite 13,000. But then again, Josh, it might be in pesos, man. Yeah, Christopher Mono is in the building. September Devon Vance Daniels is in the building. Morgan, where we at? Morgan Conyers, Lynn Irby, that's Principal Lynn Irby Hill is in the building. Principal Ronald Pugh is in the building. Vanessa Calderon, Latina Michelle, Shay Lewis, Paula Silva, Stacy Joy, I see ya. Stacy Joseph, Latina Michelle, Garfall WT. That was a beautiful picture you sent me the other day. We're holding them books, man. I appreciate you. Nicolette Lesniak is in the building. We're getting ready to get it started, y'all. Tony McClinney, Keyshawn Phelps, Angela Ryans is here. We got somebody that just says 2, Roman numeral 2. So I see you, Roman numeral 2 from Cincinnati. We got Paula Silva. Vita Joe, founder of Building Brighter Kids. I hear that. Central Hicks is in the building. My man, Kobe Wilkinson, is in the building. I'm getting ready to wrap it up, y'all. Michelle Taylor Russell, Jimmy J.B. Baker, I see you. Let's see. I think we good. Oh, we got the good Dr. Donna Ford in the building. That's going to be my guest next Saturday. The legend, Dr. Donna Y. Ford is in the building. Ohio State. The Ohio State University professor. We'll talk about her more later. We got Joshua Emulus Brooks in the building. Appreciate that pick. that you sent me. Gloria Askew, and I think I'm gonna wrap it up right here. Let me see if there's anybody that I just must yell out. Well, I see Muriel No Nonsense, man. I gotta holler at Muriel No Nonsense. I see you, Edwin Garcia. Oh, I see you, President Nardis King. Got all these names on here popping up that I don't always see, but they know I got Zaretta Hammond in the building, so they said I gotta tune in live on this one. I ain't watching the recording. I'm coming on live today because he got the big dog, man. He got Zaretta Hammond in the building, so I'm here live. So y'all, with that being said, and y'all stay for the whole 90 minutes or so. Don't leave out of here like at the top of the hour, man. We going hard for the whole session. So with that being said, man, I'm in the hotel, and I got to tell you where I'm at in a minute. But let me see how I could do this, man, because it's conferences out here. Let me see how I could do this formally now. Good morning, man. I don't know. I might be too loud. Greetings. Welcome to week 161 of the virtual AP Leadership Academy. Live from Cancun, Mexico, I might add. Man, let me ask y'all a question. How y'all feel this morning? You know why I'm laughing, right? The regulars. How y'all feel this morning? Like, do I do it, y'all? Give me something in that thread, man. Do I do it? I see y'all putting some fire in there. Do I do it? Let me do it one time. Hopefully they don't throw me out of here, because I'm not in the Hilton where I'm supposed to be. I'm in the Waldorf Astoria, man. But it's a long story to that. Do I do it, y'all, in the Waldorf? Let me do it. Let me let them know I'm on fire. Woo! I got it out, man. These folks probably gonna come here and run me out of town. Yeah, let me tell y'all something before I get started, man. I was supposed to be at the Hilton. It's like connected to this. Can you believe the heat went out at the Hilton? The heat broke in Mexico. Y'all know how hot them rooms are. I slept with no shirt on, no blanket, no sheets, sweating like a dog. But see this bracelet here? This means diamond status with Hilton. Well, that Waldorf Astoria falls under the Hilton. So I had to flex this diamond status. I say, yo, I ain't staying in no hot room, man. Y'all got to hook me up with, y'all got to do something. They said, they hit me back about an hour later. They say, your room is all booked at the Waldorf. But then I went to eat, my wife and I, at the Waldorf last night. A little piece of fish like this, and she had a little piece of fish like this. $100, baby. I called the Hilton, said, I still got that all-inclusive at the Hilton? They said, oh, yeah. All right, I'll be there, right? I ain't doing this. It was like 900 pesos. That thing scared the crap out of me. A bag of chips, $40 US. No, we going back to the Hilton. It's a little walk, but that's all right. I ain't doing this. So Waldorf Astoria, I'll sleep here, but that's about it. Let me get to this, man. I got this quick commentary. It's called I'm Serious About This. Y'all hit that share button, hit that retweet button. Let them know. It's called I'm Serious About This. Listen, y'all, I started this thing the first Saturday in May of 2020. And here we are, May 2023. We're in year 4 now, right? I haven't missed a Saturday. I won't miss a Saturday. I'm serious about this platform. So my question to you, are you serious about your work? This is my work. This is what I do. I'm serious about this platform. Someone said to me, you gonna do this on your vacation? Oh yeah. But they charge me for this connection, man. I can't take a chance on that Wi-Fi for the guests. I might lose that. I paid $1,300 to do this free live stream, man. Do you hear me? I paid $1,300. That means I'm gonna do an extra presentation this summer to make that money back. all the folks I've been saying no to, because my calendar's booked till the fall, I'm gonna say yes to one more. Get that money back, right? So somebody hit me up so I can get this money back, right? So you know, but I'm saying to you, you got to be committed, man. That's the kind of commitment you got to give. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. That's got to be your mindset. I'm not talking about me. I'll do whatever it takes to make what I'm doing happen at the highest possible level. But I got to also say this to you. This young man, I get on the flight to come here last Monday. And as soon as I walk on, the flight attendant said, "Mr. Kafele." I looked at him. I knew who it was, but before I could say it, he said, "It's Dominique, your former student." I had this young man 21 years ago as a middle schooler, right? And man, we hugged, took a selfie. He's giving me all these things on the, please treat me like I was in first class. I wasn't in first class for this flight, but he's treating me like I was, right? I don't drink. He bringing me all this alcohol. Hey, nah, I don't. Everybody looking at like, maybe that's LL Cool J, right? So, so no, LL ain't sitting at the emergency row though, right? So then when we landed, he went on the PA and he said, "My old principal is on the flight, Mr. Kafele. He's a role model for me." And then I come to find out, he said he watches the Saturday Academy, the virtual AP Leadership Academy. See, that's when you know you did this work right, man. That's when you know. I'm just asking you, somebody. I know I got the big time guests coming, but I had to get this out. Listen, I'm just asking you, are your kids still loving you 20 years later? Are your kids still loving you 30 years later? Are your kids still feeling that you poured something into them that's still resonating with them when they're adults, when they're raising their children? Is there still a piece of you in them? You got to be thinking about that in every interaction that you have with your students. Don't just see them as 12 years old. See 22, see 32, see 42. See them not just for who they are, but see them for who they will become as a result of being with you for that period of time. That's my commentary, y'all. Now my announcements. I know all the new heads, they like, "Man, when he gonna get the Zaretta?" Hey, man, this is my show, man. Right? I gotta get my stuff in here. Right? And then we're going to get rocking, but it's going to be worth, you got the VIP seats. It's going to be worth every dollar you paid. Right? So here we go. Welcome to the first timers, y'all. Welcome to all of the first timers, but don't let this be your last time. This is week 161. That means you got to go to the YouTube channel, Virtual AP Leadership Academy, and binge watch the 160 sessions that you missed, which average 90 minutes to 2 hours. So forget about that cable show you watch and you be binge watching that on your downtime. Go to the Virtual AP Leadership Academy channel and binge watch this. If you are AP, Look, that little reality show you watch, that ain't going to take your kids to the next level, but this will. Binge watch this, right? That NBA conference finals, I mean, it's good and entertaining, but it ain't going to take your youngsters to that next level, but this will. So welcome to you. Hey, y'all, listen here. That second week of July, man, that's a hot one. Let me just go through it real quick. Come join me at the National Association of Elementary School Principals Conference on July 10th in DC. Then come join me at my School Leadership Institute, where it's going to be, you're going to be with me. This ain't virtual. You be with me July 11 and 12 in Charlotte, right? Just go to principalkafele.com, scroll to the announcements, click the register button, register, and then join me in Charlotte for the School Leadership Institute. We go on 9 to 4 for 2 days, July 11 and 12. Then come to Denver. Join me at the National Association of Secondary School Principals Conference on July 13, and then join me in Jacksonville for the Black Educators Rock Conference, July 13 through 16. Now, obviously, I won't be there all those days, but I'll be presenting on the 16th. We do a full day leadership session, right? So come join me at Jacksonville at the Black Educators Rock Conference down in Jacksonville, Florida. But it's July 13 through 16. We got a lot to talk about. You know, we're going to be in Florida, right? So we got a lot to talk about. And everybody, it's just going to be so many of us down there. You just come on down. If you're not Black, you don't have to be Black. The presenters are Black. The organization is Black. But if you teach Black children, you're not Black, I want you in the front row center listening to everything that's happening, right? So I don't want you to think, "Oh, that's Black. That ain't for," no, it's for you. If you ain't Black, it's for you. You just don't have a presenter role. That's our thing for that conference. right? We want you to make sure that you get what it is that's being delivered. And then lastly, join me at the SREB, Southern Regional Educational Board, Making Schools Work Conference on July 20th in Orlando, right? Back in Florida, right? So join me for those. Real quick, y'all, the new joint, oh man, it's out. The Assistant Principal Identity, Protecting Your Leadership Mindset, Fervor, and Authenticity. If you don't have it yet, what you waiting for, right? Get your copy. Just go to Amazon and get your copy. Barnes & Noble, get your copy. ASCD, they on back order there, but they should be ready soon. Get your copy, right? It coincides with the first one for APs I wrote, the Assistant Principal 50. Make sure that you check out the morning messages on Alexa every morning. I got a new message. Just go to Alexa and say, open ASCD morning messages, and you'll hear me giving you that message in the morning to start your day. And then lastly, hit that subscribe button on the virtual AP Leadership Academy Facebook page. All right, y'all. I got a guest here, man. You know, this is what we do. And I want to bring her on up here. Man, I'm so happy to have this guest with me today. Excuse me for using this word, Zaretta, but it's spelled D-A-W-G. I got the big dog in the building this morning. That's why I got all these names on here that I don't recognize. We got Zaretta Hammond in the building. Good morning, Zaretta.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Glad you're here. Y'all say good morning to Zaretta in the thread and let her know y'all already doing that. Y'all already ahead of me. You know, I want to read Zaretta's bio, and she knows that I really like this bio because it's a first person bio. She has a regular bio, but I grabbed this one off the website because I just like it. I really do. Let me read this to you verbatim, y'all. It says, it's funny. These days, a lot of folks are calling me Dr. Hammond since the book has become required reading in many teacher education programs and school districts. Well, to set the record straight, I'm not a PhD. I have a master's degree, but I consider myself a boots on the ground teacher. I want y'all to hear that because that's going to be part of my questions. A boots on the ground teacher. I call myself a former writing teacher turned equity freedom fighter. My heart is forever with children and teachers in the classroom, not in an ivory tower, even if these days most of my students are new leaders and pre-service teachers. A quick note, not throwing any shade at all at the PhDs out there doing the work. When I was in the classroom back in the day, I taught composition, expository writing. It was where I started to understand how important literacy was to equity and how neuroscience and culture should inform our instructional practice. Since leaving the classroom, I've done work as a curriculum designer and professional developer at organizations such as the National Equity Project and the Annenberg-funded Bay Area School Reform Collaborative in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a trained facilitator in anti-bias processes and have facilitated groups focused on learning to talk about issues of racial politics and privilege. My primary work has been linking instruction, equity, and literacy. I've spent time as an adjunct professor at St. Mary's College in Northern California, where I taught adolescent literacy and trained tutors and parents in reading support strategies for struggling students of color. Almost done, y'all. As an undergraduate, I attended University of California, Berkeley, before finishing up my degree at New York University, where I majored in English literature and a minor in writing. I completed my master's in secondary English education with a concentration in writing instruction at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I simultaneously did my teacher certification starting 3 months after the birth of my son. I do not recommend this. For the past 25 years, I've maintained a small independent education consulting practice from which I do my research in writing as well as support schools doing deep instructionally focused equity work. I love that. Great stuff, great stuff. Hey folks, strap up. We getting ready to jump into it. Zaretta, we talked about your book off camera, but I want to mention this. Your first book, because I know you're working on a second, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, was released in 2014. And I checked the numbers of a lot of my colleagues. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a data guy. I'm a speaker industry guy. I'm an education industry guy. So like in sports, when people check data of everything, I'm like that in this business. I know what everybody's doing, particularly the African Americans in this business. So I look at your data from time to time, like I do most of the folks that write. And you've been in them single digits on Amazon for the past 9 years now. So as of this writing, you're at number 5 in education. So for any book, that would be phenomenal whenever it came out, for any new book. But yours has been out for 9 years, and I consider that just amazing. So I want to ask you this. As it relates to your book, and let me put it on the screen, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, which I think everybody on here is familiar with. What is it about this book that resonates with educators in all genres, teachers, leaders, university professors and departments, school districts, etc.? What is it about this book that has resonated with such a cross section of educators?
Well, first, thank you for that introduction. And yeah, I am blessed that it continues to be at the top in the single digits. That's God's doing, not mine.
Yeah.
Because again, when you just be about your Father's business, then the rest will take care of itself. But that said, I think one of the things that I hear back from teachers and leaders is that there is this kind of black box that is equity and particularly instruction, that despite all the research out there, nobody is unpacking. And my whole thing is, we don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. There is solid research, evidence-based practices out there, but people just need to connect the dots. And we've tried to oversimplify it. So what I did was I took the time to try to explain how the dots were connected, but not just explain, but then set teachers up so they can start to build their instructional decision-making skill set, and that their job is to be the personal trainer of students' cognition. Now, nobody was talking about that. Before I wrote this book, nobody was putting together equity, culturally responsive teaching, and neuroscience. And at the same time, understanding the science of learning is what we actually need to do. I use the science of learning to help people really understand how reading happened and how we needed to accelerate processes for students. So that's why I consider myself a boots on the ground. My father was 30 years in the Air Force, out of Alabama. That was his way out. And he was a master sergeant. He went as far as he could go without a college degree. And at the same time, he was that liaison between officers who had gone to officer school, West Point, and the enlisted men. And that's the role I see myself, as this universal translator. There's some good stuff coming out of the ivory towers, but it's not good if we can't use it. We got to close the knowing doing gap. So that was my intention. And it wasn't because I'm just going to write a book. I wrote from what I saw and I knew actually moved the needle for students, not on test scores, but on their ability to be the leaders of their own learning. And all I did was at a certain point just wrote down what had been my direct experience and the experience of the teachers that I had coached. And I could tell you when I started, and even when I go down that road, there were progressive educators who would tell me, oh, we don't need to talk about literacy. We just need to talk about anti-racism and bias. Listen, talking about that is important. We have to take that stance, but then they're going to tell you how long vowels work. And so, that was my commitment. My commitment was to do that translation. Here is what you need to use. This is how you're going to close that knowing doing gap. And it's more than just getting the new strategy that's out there. Friends don't let friends just call everything culturally responsive. They put that shit on everything like it's hot sauce.
Oh. Yeah.
My French.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I was already ready for it from the last time we met. Listen, you call yourself a boots on the ground teacher. at the time that you were in the classroom teaching, and you turned to this equity freedom fighter. First, I got a four-parter for you. First, when you say boots on the ground teacher, I think I get that. And I think there's a lot of people on here that get it. But I also think that there are some folks that may not get that. Yeah. When you say boots on the ground teacher, what are you saying?
Here's the thing, and I wasn't referring to myself when I was a classroom teacher. I use that to refer to myself right now. So okay. Even as a professional developer, as a consultant, when I come in, I'm not wanting to do some PD and, you're never going to see me. Let's go in your classroom. What's happening in the classroom? What's happening in the instructional course? When I call myself boots on the ground, that's where we're going to look. And that's what we're going to see. What is actually happening? And one of the things I try to do is really help teachers really see what's happening, assess current reality. If this is where we need to be, but this is where you are, how do we close that gap? Yeah. And one of the things I try to lean in as I, keep my boots on the ground is, leading with what Richard Elmore said, professor at Harvard. He's since passed away, but his work, I think, is really foundational in talking about the teacher, the student, the content. These are all in a dynamic dance. They make up that core. If you don't really understand how they interact and each kind of push on the other, then you are not going to close the gap by just bringing in a new strategy. Because again, the center word in culturally responsive is responsive. It's not just relevant. That's a different thing. But it's the responsive. What will I do when the student is confused? What will I do when the student isn't learning that? And that's what Richard DeFore, right, the godfather of the PLC structure, talks about. First question is, what do we want students to know and be able to do? Second, how will we know when they've learned it? But the third question is the money ball, right? And the third question is, what will we do when they're confused or they don't learn it? And that's where I think a lot of folks get stuck, right? They don't know how to, what will I do? They just repeat it, or they just leave the poor students behind. And this is where we see in schools cognitive red lines. So those students on the wrong side of that, and the other students, usually who don't look like us, are just continuing to thrive and march forward. So my whole boots on the ground is, if we don't get that instructional core straight, if we don't improve instructional decision-making, the teacher's capacity to do that, we're not leading in a way that helps teachers really look at their instruction. And I'm not talking about some weak-ass universal, learning by design, right? This is the idea that everybody's like, oh, we're just going to do UDL. UDL is not going to erase a cognitive red line. It is not going to improve information processing. All it's going to do is get students through the lesson. And that's very different than I actually can get through it by myself. So when I talk about boots on the ground, that's all the messiness that I love to get teachers to lean into, because teaching is fast and furious. How am I going to stop and look at that? Well, there are ways to do that. How do I coach the student to actually be meta-strategic about their own learning moves, right? And not in a patronizing way, not in a penalizing way. So that's my whole thing. We got to get in there and really improve teachers' instructional decision-making. That's what an AP who has wearing that instructional leader hat really needs to be thinking about. How do I help teachers improve that? And this is, I'm going to stop there, because we could just start. I'll go for 90 minutes on that.
No, but you took it right to that part B of this question. So therefore, because you mentioned the coaching aspect. So on this platform, particularly the regulars on the platform, these are assistant principals. These are aspiring administrators, folks who are still in the classroom who want to get here. So with given everything that you just said, and then with that culmination of this word coaching, what are the implications for the assistant principal? And you can kind of put the assistant principal and the principal in your same answer, right? So the leadership, what are the implications for that person?
Well, I think number one implication is you're going to have to assign yourself. What does that mean? There's nobody going to come and start talking to you about instructional decision-making and instructional core. What they're going to start talking to you about is strategies. And are all teachers using these strategies? Well, that is a road that is not going to lead you to equity. It's going to lead you to a pedagogy of compliance. And if we really want liberatory education, right, students can have agency and are able to improve their own learning over time, because that is the definition of accelerated learning. And part of what APs and principals have to do is understand what they're actually leading, right? And so the degree to which this is not about, we're all going to be, doing restorative circles, or we're all going to be using, UDL. That is kind of a pronouncement, and then we're just in compliance. Are you using it? Are you implementing it? But the reality is we have not focused on the student as the primary unit of change. So the first thing that instructional leader has to do is understand what the goal is. Only the learner learns. If I can't help students level up their learning, become meta-strategic about their learning moves, like when I keep making a mistake, am I aware of what I'm doing and I know how to correct it? And I learned this as a teacher in the classroom. I taught composition, writing, and if there was not enough red ink for me to get students to see a comma splice or run-on sentence or incoherent paragraphs, and me just continually circling something did not change that. So I had to step back and see, how do I get them to see what I see with my trained eye? Yeah. And that's when I said, oh, okay, I'm over here listening to ASA Hilliard talking about the cognitive capacity of our students. I'm over here learning about writing instruction. I'm like, oh, let's just bring these two together. So my coaching of my own students was, I'm going to bring some culturally responsive structures. And that wasn't just mentioning race. These were structures that grew out of collectivist learning practices. We did peer editing. I taught them how to do it, meaning they got trained and then they practice it, right? And it was really interesting because I had a student, Adam, he was a Latino, and it was funny because we had conference. He could not see that comma splice. He just couldn't see this mistake I kept saying he was making. But after going through peer editing, where they get the papers of other classmates, everybody switches paper. You have to bring 3 copies of your draft essay. You give them out to your peers, and it is a type of protocol. And they give you back, they've read it, they've made comments as readers, and then you get those copies back. Plus you have the protocol where you get an opportunity to ask questions and they give you that feedback and response. I saw all my students improve, particularly those that were most dependent or most struggling with their writing. And then when I conferenced with him one day, he says, how am I making all these comma splices? And I just looked up at the heavens and said, thank you, Lord. The child sees it. I could not force him to see it. He had to actually be able to know what he was looking at. But we don't teach like that. Most teachers are covering their content. Covering your content is not instruction. And if you just want to put grade level material, that's a whole nother thing. Don't even get me started on, we're going to do grade level material. If the children are reading 2 or 3 grade levels back, you know what that leads to? Over scaffolding. And the suggestion isn't then dumb down the material. It is you need to actually teach them to read at grade level. So the reality is we are trying to fix things by not having to fix the main thing. And that's what the AP has to do. Focused effort. Then you have to understand how to help people move through the human side of change. So it's one thing to say, here's what's broken. But if I can't help you manage your own self as a grown person, teacher, and be able to help you do things collectively, so there's some collective efficacy, then we're not using any kind of collaborative inquiry tools. See, people are good for just saying these words because they sound sexy, they sound progressive, but people ain't doing the work. So my booths are about, let's do the work, versus just call names and saying we're using PLCs. And no, when you really look at it, I'm like, that's not really what's happening.
Yeah. Well, hey, folks, we're only in the second question. You need to hit that share button, hit that retweet button. A lot of power being generated here this morning. I'm on like a 4-part number 2 question, and I got quite a few questions, right? So let's go. Zaretta, this word equity, and I know you've been on sometimes watching, And I talk about this word a lot. And let me be brutally frank with everybody on here, including yourself. There are days that I sit on those planes or sit in that hotel or sit in my house and I say, how much longer am I going to do this work?
Yeah.
And a lot of it centers around this word equity, because equity is a buzzword to me. That's all it is. When I started to understand what people were saying about equity, I said, well, that's who I was since the day I walked into a classroom in 1988, right, in Brooklyn, New York City. But here we are now in 2023, and a ton of my clients, I used to say a lot, now I'm saying a ton of my clients are asking me, please don't mention that word when you come here, right? Yeah, and I'm like, well, let's talk about what this word means first, right? So we get into a discussion, and then they might say, well, let me check with some other people. And I'm sitting there like, man, they're asking me to not bring me to the program. So what I have done, because I like to think I have some degree of intelligence, I have figured out a way to talk equity without mentioning the word equity, right? So they giving me a standing ovation on this equity topic, not realizing what it was, because they get caught up into the politics and the hysteria out in the world around this word equity. So I'm saying all that to say this. My question: you said you're an equity freedom fighter. That probably, if someone read that in your bio, that probably would scare them. But I still want to ask you, what does that mean? What does it mean to, because it's one thing to be an equitable practitioner, but what is an equity freedom fighter?
Yeah, the equity freedom fighter, the way I define it, I'm so with you on the fact that people have gotten all twisted out of shape around the word equity.
Yeah.
But what it reveals to me is they're carrying a mental model about what that word means, right? And somehow it's now attached permanently to racial politics and, telling the truth about our history in America and who has unearned advantage and who has unearned disadvantage, and people don't want to have those conversations. So I think it's been tainted by those politics, the culture wars, all that nonsense and shenanigans. So that's how they're defining it. For me, equity goes right back to kind of a core definition the National Equity Project started with and has kind of continued to refine it. But at its core, it's reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails, right? Interrupting reproductive instructional practices that lead to underdevelopment of students' capacities or doesn't advance them, and cultivating the gifts and genius and talents of every student, right? Particularly those historically marginalized. The problem with words that people then start bouncing around is they don't really get underneath what they are. So to me, I do the same thing that you do. I talk about instruction in a way where everybody says, I want that. And I said, do you know what that is, right? That's equity. Or I have to give a presentation where I'm focused on instruction. But if you do these things, you're going to get an equitable outcome, right? I call that the hide the vegetables method. Like, y'all still need some broccoli up in here. To grind it up, put that sweet potato in the muffin. You know how y'all used to do with the kids. My kids grown, but that's how we came up, is to make sure that you got all the nutrients you need. And as leaders, we would be complicit in maintaining kind of these systems, this pedagogy of compliance, if we were not focused on making sure we're interrupting the reproductive practice. Like, there are some things we're doing that we grow this gap. Whatever this gap is, we are growing it. And there's a reason why Black and brown kids, Indigenous children are on the wrong side of that gap, right? That's where our history comes in. But at a certain point, all you have to do is let the residue of that inequity that is already in the system just have its way, and you're going to start having this gap. Kids come to school with maybe a 6-month gap. That's all they come with, and you can fill that in. If you're doing your instruction correctly in kindergarten, first grade, you can close that pretty quickly. But what happens is we have practices in school that continue to feed the gap. And we see this with children who start in the school district at kindergarten, but they reach 5th grade and they're reading at a 2nd grade level. Well, you did that in school. That didn't happen at home. That ain't code.
No, that's just
So enslaved people actually taught each other to read with sticks and dirt. So why can't we get it done with PhDs and a whole lot of money by Title I? Needless to say, that's what I think is really the biggest challenge. In focusing on equity, I don't think we have to keep saying the words. I think that's what DeFore called a seductive shortcut. If we just keep talking about equity, if we just keep then talking about implicit bias, somehow that's going to lead to better instruction. Or we make it a motivational issue. Those kids just aren't motivated. So if we put some kente cloth in front of them like that, don't insult us like that. No. But that is the insult, that we're just not motivated. And that goes to one of what Brian Stevenson says is one of the core racial narratives, that we lack the desire as colored people, right, of all hues, the impetus to improve ourselves, right? As dark-skinned people, we have low intelligence. And as dark-skinned people, we are inclined to criminality. Those are the top 3. And as leaders, you have to see how that's playing out in your school context. You have to know the racial history of your local community and school district. When did they stop putting housing covenants in that didn't allow Jews or Asians or Black folk? If you don't know that, you don't know how you're growing your own achievement gaps. And it's going to look different in every region. It might look different from the school across town that's in the same district. But if you don't understand how that was, you don't know what you're trying to fix. And instead, we just go with this meta, we're going to talk about equity. So I put a little bit of the onus on progressive educators, because you haven't been doing justice to breaking down what equity is. You've allowed it to be so bastardized and to be about one thing, leaving out instruction. So now people glommed onto, oh, that's all you're doing. I've gone to trainings and all we're talking about ad nauseum is implicit bias. Like, that's a one-time, two-time conversation. And then you use that to go back and look at your instruction, to actually say, these are the 4 things we need to make sure we're not doing. These are the new things, new structures, new processes. And if people have never done them, then you need to train them on doing them. And then making sure that they are paying attention to not doing the thing that's going to take you back. But that's what leaders have to do. They have to know what to keep, what to stop doing, before they ever start doing new things. And what I see is we just keep piling on new thing after new thing after new thing under this banner of equity.
Yeah. You said a lot there.
I did.
But it was good stuff. That feed the gap, that resonated, I noticed, with a few people in the comments, feeding the gap, as opposed to doing a lot of the things that you just articulated here. But the other piece, when you talked about the focus on implicit bias, right? And I tend to see that myself. I like I said about being a student of this business. When I'm at a conference, I don't just come in and do a presentation and jet out. I stay and attend sessions.
Right.
And I think that speaks volumes to the people that see me walk in the room, particularly when I'm the keynote speaker. Like, wow, he's sitting here in a breakout session. I'm trying to learn from this presenter. So I notice a lot of emphasis on the implicit bias. I mean, and as you will agree, it's necessary. But at some point, as you said, I'm just piggybacking, we got to get to the instruction.
Absolutely.
Right. And if we're just talking implicit bias, then when do we make that transition to now, how do we help Jalil to become a better reader, to become better in mathematics, etc., if we're only talking about the one thing? So there's so much there. But now to transition, I'm thinking back on my years as a teacher and a principal. And I spent most of my time in the city upon which I was born and raised, East Orange, New Jersey. and everybody was Black in that city. So I was therefore unapologetically African-centered in everything we did in that school, in a couple of schools, everything we did, which was inclusive of the way I dressed at the time. So I'm saying that to say this, and I might add, the results were predictable because we were speaking directly to our audience and they were able to see themselves in the learning. So the results were predictable. That was my hypothesis when I sold it to the superintendent. I said, the results will be there, right? We'll be number one, right, in this district. Just allow me to restructure what it is that we currently do, and hence the rest was history. So here's my question. Here you were, this high school English teacher, and I want to ask you, what role did race, did culture play in your pedagogy in that classroom with your young people?
Well, here's the thing. I think it was more kind of my experience as a student moving through the system. I grew up in San Francisco, Pink Projects and Hunters Point.
I'm on purpose, by the way, because you're on. This Willie Mays I got on the back here.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, I used to listen with my gramps to Willie on the radio, you know, when he was out there doing his thing. But here's what I see, you know, same as in New Jersey, same as in, you know, Atlanta, wherever you have large concentrations of Black folks, brown folks, indigenous folks, because I see the same thing. I just came from Phoenix, where you know, the majority of the students of color are First Nation students and families. That, you know, my experience in terms of really trying to help people get a sense of that instruction was recognizing that it wasn't so much me talking about race, but talking about how the brain learns. So here's the first principle of the science of learning. All new knowledge must be coupled with existing knowledge, meaning your funds of knowledge, what you already know, has to be coupled with that. So to me, the racial politics come into play when we ask, why are you not letting students learn in the way that their brain has been structured, socialized, wired to learn? And coming from a collectivist culture, right? That's because the politics of that is that we had to, as a country, denigrate that way and to trivialize it, suppress it in order to maintain the hierarchy, the white supremacist culture that was at the core. Now, this didn't happen, you know, in the 60s or 70s. This is like from the beginning. And so to reverse that, and this is what Dr. ASA Hilliard talks about, we have to reclaim not just kind of a sense of self, you know, African mindset, but we also have to reclaim our pedagogy. So in the current book I'm writing, you know, I try to dig deeper into really helping people understand, how do you use culture as a cognitive scaffold? Because that's what people don't know. They think, oh, that's just us talking about race if we're talking about culture or honoring your identity. For me, it was really understanding, and which I knew. I was the oldest granddaughter. I saw how my grandmother, who did not go beyond the third grade in Louisiana before she came out to San Francisco as a young family. They came out in 1940. She cleaned white folks' houses. That's how she made her money. But what she did was she had mother wit. She was one of the smartest, intuitively smart people I knew. I was the oldest granddaughter. I had to learn by doing. Come hang with her, learn how to do this. Whether I was the sous chef in the kitchen or as she got older, I was her apprentice, house cleaning, you know, doing a little more of the heavy lifting stuff she couldn't do anymore as she was getting older. So this was everybody. I have gone to Alaska, Native Alaskans, Alaska Natives, First Nation people in Alaska. This is what they do. We apprentice our children when they're appropriately aged into knowing how to do things that are going to build their capacity to be independent, but also to contribute to the livelihood of the community. Like, we need you to learn how to babysit the younger children while some other folk go out. So somebody's going to train you to do that. Our classrooms do not honor collectivist learning practices. So to me, the conversation isn't always around race unless you're creating an environment that students' brains feel is intellectually unsafe, right? Because there are a lot of microaggressions. So if teachers don't know how to tap those microaggressions down or to limit racial bullying, which usually around third, fourth, certainly by fifth grade, young white boys are flexing, they're testing it out. So if we don't understand that's what they're doing, particularly when you have that, even amongst ourselves, colorism, we start doing it. So if we don't know how to manage that, then what's going to happen is the brain is going to be flooded with too much cortisol. Then you can't have students actually learning at that deep level if that is happening. Instead, what they're going to do is just pretend they're learning. They're going to go through the motions. But when the test comes, like, dang, this student still is not learning this. He's not stupid. His brain is just too stressed out. And we're creating that environment. We're not checking it. We're not making it one that's, that brain can be calm and ready. So we are not understanding how indigenous peoples all around the world have learned for millions of years. And instead, we want a British, European, Eurocentric system that we now have to fit in and leave all our knowledge about learning, about growing intellectually behind to fit into this, hence the pedagogy of compliance. So that's the intersection to me, is what we are trying to leave out versus how are we actually leaning in and building that. What I tell my teachers when I'm coaching and supporting them and my leaders is I don't ever have to have a discussion about race in order to bring collectivist practices in the classroom. But what I see a lot of people do is they think, oh, I got to tell the student about how the brain works, or I have to have a conversation about race, or we have to talk about race. If we talking about it, we're not being about it. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's really about the doing, not telling kids. It's not a pronouncement they need. It's these practices and their tools that their brain is already wired. They're going to the brain is going to oh, I know how to do this. Not necessarily the skill, but this way of making meaning. My focus is helping people understand the role information processing plays in that. If the student can't process new content, turn it, inert information into usable knowledge, then we know they're not going to progress. And here's the thing I wanted you to remember, audience. Thomas Jefferson, Horace Mann, all the white men that built our public education systems weaponized the science of learning. They knew this research, not because it was research, because this is how humans learn. They weaponized it. That's how we get cognitive red lines. This is why we had anti-literacy laws. Don't teach them to read. Not because of the content, because learning to read wires your brain for your ability to do higher order thinking.
You said a lot.
I did. I keep doing that.
No. I mean that in a very positive way. So much there to process. Zaretta, you've mentioned Dr. Hilliard a couple of times now, and I'm hearing his voice and his writing as you speak, maroon within us. And I just wanted, for the benefit of the audience, because I've been in this business for a long time. I'm 62, and I've learned that there's a lot of names that are just common for me that the younger generations, including in the African American community, do not know. So with Baba ASA Hilliard, anybody out there that doesn't know that name, he made his transition, but his work remains. ASA Hilliard. Look him up. Just go to Amazon and buy every book he wrote, right? Either book he wrote or co-wrote or edited, right? Anything that says ASA Hilliard. It's Dr. ASA Hilliard. He was commonly known as Baba ASA Hilliard. Get his work, right? It's very important work, and particularly when you're working with African American young children, right? With that, I want to set up a scenario for you, Greta. I'm this fictitious administrator. I'm this white administrator that was recently appointed to become an assistant principal in a school that is predominantly young people of color, particularly African American students. Somebody shared that Zaretta Hammond was going to be a guest on some guy named Principal Kafele. I never heard of him, but I got this link, this shared that Zaretta Hammond. So, and I've heard of her before. Let me tune in. This person might be watching right now, and this person's saying, "Man, she's throwing a lot of stuff out here. She's mentioning this culturally responsive. I'll throw in culturally relevant pedagogy, and we mentioned equity and so on and so forth." And the person's saying, I heard of these things, but in terms of my practice, this is not what I do. This is not who I am, because I really don't know what it is, right? But this person is now the number 2 in a building, or this person could be number 1 in a building as the principal. I don't necessarily have to say this is a white administrator. I could say a Black administrator and give the same scenario. Right. I just wanted to paint this picture for whatever the reason. My question to you is very simple. Let's anticipate that this person is watching this morning. Mm-hmm. What do you say to this person?
I say that there are a couple of things they need to do. One is get a sense of current reality. What does that mean? They actually have to look at what's going on in their school building, but they have to look at it through new eyes. So there are ways in which we see things, right? There's this large achievement gap. Black and brown kids aren't achieving, and we normalize that. Like, we can't see past what seems to be like, yeah, it's always like that. So in culturally responsive teaching, I take this stance of what any researcher does. You go into an environment and you make the familiar strange. And what that means is I have to step back and really interrogate what I think I know about that thing. And you have to make the strange familiar, meaning there's something happening over there. Like, that group of kids is thriving in that teacher's classroom. I don't know what's up with that. So we have to take an inquiry stance to that, meaning current reality. What is currently going on without interpretation? What is currently going on? When you look at the data, go back 10 years, not just 2 or 3 years. Like, is this a pattern? Like I said, know the racial history. So this is work that nobody's going to assign to you. This is why I say, if you really, truly want to be on the path of equity, you're going to have to assign yourself. Your district is giving you no PD in this. Once you understand current reality, then you have to see how kids and families are experiencing. So this could be a survey. This could be a meet and greet where you were, coming together, getting to know each other. With the ask from them is, tell me how you're experiencing it on this measure and that measure. Then you have to actually step back and get into classrooms. And I don't mean these weak ass learning walks or the equity audit or everybody got a name for it. I'm going to go into the class in 10 minutes. What you going to see in 10 minutes?
Yeah,
let's
nothing.
Get real. And what I say is, this is why we use videotape. And I don't want to see the teacher teach it. I want to see the kids. Who's doing the talking in the classroom? So when I work with teams, we actually have a detailed data collection, what we're looking at and what we're looking for. Because 2 things need to happen. As the leader, you have to train yourself to understand what these measures are that are the thing we're working toward, and then to see what are the patterns that keep us from being there. Now you can step back and say, what does the research say that helps us close these gaps? Then you can say, what are the structures that allow us to do that? And you got to look at your faculty. How am I engaging them in this idea of collective efficacy? I wrote a chapter in John Hattie's book, The 10 Mind Frames for Leaders, right? Okay. And this idea was, the chapter I wrote was about, as a leader, I embrace change, right? I help my faculty move toward that thing that is important. So understand the human side of change. You got to shape the path. You've got to motivate the emotional side. Why are we doing this? People really need to understand that. And then they need to actually understand, here are steps to do that. And it can't be the seductive shortcut of, we're just going to try this one thing. It is a little more of a complicated algorithm, and you cannot lie to people. And I tell folks, let's stop trying to tell people we're going to turn this around in a semester or in a year. You have to say, hey, listen, this is going to be 18 months. But what we're looking for, or the short and medium indicators, students are leaning into learning. They have vocabulary around learning that they can talk about. They can talk about their own learning moves. You see them in discussions using more academic language, and they're kind of melding that with the register of their own mother tongue or kind of home language, and they're doing it with greater fluency. But you need to track that over time.
Yeah.
This is why the videotape is so important. And then teachers in their PLC should be looking at that. But this idea of we just go number crunch. So people have gotten really hot on, well, we're going to look at street data. And as much as I really like the idea that people are looking with an equity lens, the numbers themselves won't tell you all that you need to do. You cannot get students actively engaged if they are not feeling that they are growing in their competence. Competence precedes confidence. So there's no engagement that you can get if the student is not self-initiating that engagement. Everything else is just activities.
Yeah.
So to me, that's really what needs to happen. Go ahead.
No, I was going to repeat what you said. Competence precedes confidence.
And here's what I will say to kind of build on that. A lot of people hear that and think, oh, I got to go technical. I got to be rigid. No, it's just the opposite. What does the science of learning say about how we learn? We learn through intellectual curiosity. We learn through productive struggle. Just because you're building competence doesn't mean it ain't fun.
Yeah.
Just because you're building competence doesn't mean somebody's not checking that you've internalized something or that you actually can do that. If you can't do it, you need to go back and try it again. Listen, if you were in a dojo learning martial arts, that's what your sensei would do. If you were a carpenter in a wood shop, he'd look at that joint you just did and say, no, let's rip that up. I was in high school, they had clothing, sewing, but we did more than just sew aprons. We literally made clothes. This was an elective option. Listen, my teacher, she also happened to be the math teacher. She was handy with a seam ripper. She thought that seam was crooked or not happening. She'd show me and tell me why. She'd rip it up and say, go out and do it again. We don't give kids the opportunity for practice and that productive struggle to grapple with things. And we don't use it as kind of this way in which we're building community. We think it's like, again, we got to go off and eat a pound of broccoli with, no cheese sauce. That's not what I'm saying when I say competence precedes confidence. And that's, again, the mindset that is just adjacent to a pedagogy of compliance. I don't care how progressive and how many times you use the word equity. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you're not helping kids become the leaders of their own learning, just because you don't use equity and culturally responsive 5 times, I am not impressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to put this on the screen real quick. I'm not gonna read all of this, but it caught my attention. Antonella, she said, and I hope you're still here, Antonella. You said, why are we making this a black and white thing again? And I'll just read one more line. We learn from the past. We can't go back and change it, but we can make it better. And I'm gonna stop it there. As a matter of fact, let me read this last one. Not educating the African American was disgusting, right? And I'm gonna leave it right there. I want to say this to you. I'm not going to switch gears, Antonella, but I wanted to address it slightly, because in addressing it, just being exhaustive would probably take us until next year this time, right? to be quite frank with you. But just briefly, Antonella, as you probably know, I do a lot of presenting, as Zaretta does as well. And that means I do a lot of pre-session meetings, typically on Zoom these days, just talking about what I will be talking about. But not only are they asking me questions, the client, I'm asking them questions. And one of the questions I'm asking them is what are your demographics there? And they'll tell me. So they've got black, they got white, they got Latino, Asian, whatever it is. So I ask, is there an achievement gap in your school? And they'll say, yes, it is. and I'll say, where do Black students fall on this achievement gap? Are they on the plus side or the minus side? And they say, oh, our Black students are underachieving. And 99%, the proverbial 99.9% of the time, this will be my reality. And I do about 200 presentations a year. So this will be my reality. Our Black students are underperforming. Now, that's no fault of their Black students, but I'm not going to get into all that today. But the reality is their Black students are underperforming. Well, that's why, Antonella, this, as you call it, this black-white thing, that's why that conversation has to occur. I can't look at children and just say the children, because the data says, but the Black children are underperforming. So then my follow-up question to them is typically, what are you doing for the Black children, right? What are you doing differently since your Black children are underperforming, right? I can't pretend that that data doesn't exist, Antonella. That data exists, and it doesn't exist in one region of America. That's the totality of America. You can go to places like Montana where Black children Black people represent less than 1% of the total population in the state of Montana. Guess what? They have an achievement gap with that less than 1%, because I checked it out. You can go to Wyoming, you can go to Idaho, you can go to Maine, you can go all these different places where there are hardly any Black folks, but yet that 1% or less than 1%, that gap's still there. So this thing that you call black-white thing, we have to have that conversation, because we have to generate solutions to not only closing that gap, but eliminating that gap. If you want to add anything to that, feel free.
Yeah, I'll add a few things, because I think, again, I think you said it very well, that we are not making it a black or white thing. The system was designed, and it was designed to sort along racial and class lines. So this is not an issue just about race. This is an issue of the ways in which those particular groups of people have used the collectivist approaches to learning, and that those ways of learning are not integrated into the pedagogies of the classroom. So this is not about remediation. This is actually about not utilizing the schema and the cognitive wiring that those students come prepared to use, and then telling them they're wrong and stupid as a result of it. So when we are looking at using culture, collectivist practices, then what we will understand is you will start to stop seeing that kind of demographic or data or disaggregation where it's disproportionate students of color. The students of color, majority come from a collectivist culture. So that's why you have to dig deeper. We're not talking about this as a racial thing. We're talking about as a pedagogical thing. And typically the response is to blame the student and to make it about special education or remediation. Versus if I actually just give you the medicine that you need, or give you more fresh air, that the body will naturally take care of healing itself. But we don't do that, because again, these narratives serve a lot of purposes beyond schooling, and schooling is an extension. But here's the thing I do want to say is, part of when we look at comments like that, what we have to see is it shows us the mental model that a leader is going to lead with. So if we don't think it's about black and white, we say all kids, and we're going to use strategies and things that privilege some kids because that's maybe the way they learned at home, and it's not going to privilege other kids, despite the fact that at home they have a rich literary life, they have rich learning, there are communities that have different pedagogical ways of processing information. And we have to actually, particularly in those first few years, we have to leverage that. Then again, in the middle years, because this is where autonomy is really kicking in. And if kids know they're learning things at home or in the community or teaching themselves, but when they come to school, it doesn't feel the same way, that they are allowed to be their full selves, then you really do have to pay attention to that. So again, I really want to encourage Antonella to really press herself to, again, I would agree, see it at beyond black and white in terms of racial politics, but actually look at it around the cognitive science of learning, around culture as the wiring in terms of how we process. Is every class, all instruction is culturally responsive. The question is, to whose culture is it responsive? Right? And so if it's only one way and there are multiple pathways of accessing that content, and here's the thing, one way is good for all kids, meaning this is not a matter, oh, I got to do collectivist for some kids, individual, and that's just too much. No, all humans started as collectivist. And what we know is that is what typically you see in honors and higher level classes. Bring that down. Water up the lower level remedial tier 2 instruction. So special education should actually be looking special, not like a black hole those kids don't ever leave out of. So there's a lot for you to actually kind of, again, widen your aperture, interrogate things, make the assumption, assume positive intent, and that it is not a racial black and white thing.
You intellectualize it. I tell you that. Great stuff. Great stuff. Listen, Zaretta, I wanna, as I did last time we got together, I wanna go here now.
Yeah.
I wanna read. I want y'all to hear something. This is on page, for those of you that may have culturally responsive teaching in the brain. Let me put it back up here again. Where we at? Here we go.
I feel like we're in Bible study now.
We in Bible study now, man. I'm getting ready to read, y'all. I'm on page 24, verse. No, let me see. But I have 19 different cultures in my classroom is the subtitle.
Yeah.
Check this out, y'all. I want you to hear this. I have 19 different cultures represented in my classroom, a teacher might say. Do I have to learn about the customs, foods, and beliefs of 19 different cultures? This is the question I always get from teachers new to culturally responsive teaching. The key to understanding how culture guides the brain during the culturally responsive teaching lies in focusing on deep culture. Hear me, somebody. Rather than focus on the visible fruits of culture, dress, food, holidays, and heroes, we have to focus on the roots of culture, worldview, core values, and group values. The answer to this question comes from understanding universal patterns across cultures. I call these similarities cultural archetypes. While cultures might be different at the surface and shallow levels, at the root of different cultures there are common values, worldviews, and practices that form these archetypes. The term archetype has its origins in the ancient Greek, and I wasn't even going to read that, but let me do it since I got into it. It comes from the root word, which I can't pronounce, archean, is that right? Which means original or gold, and the word typos, which means pattern, model, or type. While there might be a number of different cultures represented in one classroom, when we look closer, we see patterns that unite some cultures. Last sentence, understanding these cultural archetypes can make culturally responsive teaching more manageable in a diverse classroom. Cultural archetypes give us a starting point. It's a lot there, y'all, but I wanted to share that with you for this reason. I wanted to ask you this question. You talk about these cultural archetypes, and you say that there are two that are important for culturally responsive teachers to know, and they are collectivism, which you've been talking about, and individualism, and oral and written traditions. I got a two-parter, and the first one is just to elaborate on these cultural archetypes.
Yeah, the cultural archetypes are really, and these are, again, patterns, right? So this came about just me growing up in San Francisco. I had friends that were Asian, South Asian, Arabic, it's a variety, needless to say, Mexican, Chicano, and all the diversity that is in the Latin diaspora. You had it there in the Bay Area. And what I realized is when I went to my Arabic friend's house, when I went to my Chinese friend's house, or my Korean friend's house, when I went, the patterns were the same. Grandma was living at home. Like, oh yeah, y'all take care of your elders as well, right? There was elder respect. When I came into the house, I needed to sit and chat with grandma for a minute until grandma released us. And then, it wasn't a matter of we could just zoom by her. Oh no, sit down there, give due respect. She released us after drilling me with some questions and whatnot. And then somebody was going to put some food and drink in front of them. I am obligated to take a sip and take a bite, even if I'm not hungry. Why? Because that is our collectivist practice. And I started to see, in addition to that, there were nuances to that. And so for me, I started, and this was part of assigning myself. Let me understand this. Then I started looking at it. What were those cultural patterns when it came to learning? So this is where I started to accumulate those archetypes, archetypes across cultures, so that it wasn't just multiculturalism. This was really the shallow culture. I talk about culture tree. So the root is really important, but the shallow is where the practices are, because nobody hands you a manual and like, this is how you do in African American culture. No, you learn by doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You learn by putting yourself in the context, and you pay attention. Somebody's going to pull your coattail every now and then. Like, we don't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see it with young children, but you also see it when you're new to a community. So the reality is, we have to understand collectivism better, because the Eurocentric cultural model is individualism. Although there are white people who are collectivists, all you need to do is look at some Scottish folks and Irish folks, and you're talking about some collectivist folk. And that's why I provided that chart there. So this is not racial as much as it is cultural. We need to understand the differences there. But here's the other thing I would say. Even within collectivism, there are variations, right? Alaska Native folks, quietness, but they're no less dynamic and friendly and fun-loving, but they present collectivism in a different way than Black folks. We are just the opposite in many ways, right? Loud and connecting, not loud just to be loud, but in terms of generating that oxytocin, right? Mm-hmm. Alaska Native folks generate it in a different way. So all of these things are important, but if a teacher is going to be teaching in a multicultural, multi-racial classroom, then they are required to understand this. If all they know is their own way and haven't widened their aperture, they're going to mistake cultural behavior for pathology or for disobedience. Like one cultural archetype pattern I see across all is distributed expertise, meaning when you don't know something, you go to the hive, right? I can ask my friend, somebody get on the phone, call, cousins and whatnot. You ask the community. That is not a practice in individualism. So when a student comes in, say from Central America, and this is the way, and they may be in middle school, I don't know something, I start talking, you're going to get in trouble. You're talking, keep your eye on your papers. Now you're being, accused of cheating. This child's brain is wired that when I'm confused, I go to the hive. I go to the distributed expertise within my community of learners. If the teacher does not understand that, she misinterprets or he misinterprets what that behavior is. This becomes a problem. So now we have disproportionate discipline because the teacher has taken that student out because of talking in class.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't want to switch gears on that either. Let's stay there for a second. That talking in class, young person, and this goes back to that comment from the young lady as well, where you've got different cultures in a classroom, and I don't understand it. And one of the object lessons for me, Zaretta, was going to see the movie Black Panther 2 times in 2 different communities. I went to see it on the opening night. I did not go see Black Panther to see Black Panther. I don't know what that movie's about. That's just not my thing, right? I went there to study the audience. I went there on the opening night, the second night, I should say, to a theater where there was an all-Black audience. And I just wanted to see the reactions because I knew that this would be a packed audience. I knew it would be just a lot of people and a lot of dynamics. Right. So I went to the theater, and it was everything that I thought it would be in terms of just the call and response, so to speak. Yeah. The clapping, right? The ovations, the laughing, it was just, I felt at home, right? So it was reminiscent of being in the church I grew up in, a Baptist church, right? So then the next night I went somewhere where I knew there would not be many Black folks, if at all. I just wanted to see the difference in the two audiences.
Yeah.
So in going to that theater that was predominantly white, I was keying in on certain parts of the movie where I remember there was a reaction from the audience. Let me see if there's a reaction here, and it wasn't. The clapping wasn't there. The call and response wasn't there. None of the things that I saw in the Black theater were there. And one thing I didn't mention with the Black theater, the folks stayed and read the credits, right? I didn't see that in the white theater. When it was over, everybody got up and left. Whereas in the Black theater, folks applauded, ovation, and then stayed and read the credits until the credits were exhausted. So I'm saying that to say, if someone from outside of the African-American community came into that theater and observed what was going on in that theater, they may leave with the wrong conclusion as to what was happening, and may even question, how are they learning? How are they processing when there's so much going on is verbally while the movie is playing?
Well, here's the reason why it's so important for people to understand how in a collectivist culture people learn to process information, right? And this is one of the, when I'm working with small teams of teachers, and back to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar, one of the things they have to do is you have to put yourself in that environment, meaning you need to go to the theater where it's predominantly Black folks. And it does not matter that they're watching a Black oriented movie, because here's the reality. I'm one of those people. I talk to the screen. Girl, don't you know he in the closet? Don't go in the closet. Everybody else talking around me. And Lord, here we go again. You know, it is just a dynamic way in which we interact with something else, right? And I talk about it in the book, this participatory talk. That's what it's called. And the reality is that teacher who does not understand it needs to just not try to understand it. This is what we call cultural humility, and just put themselves in that environment over and over, because typically what's happening is their amygdala is getting hijacked in terms of thinking, oh, it needs to be calm, or they need to be quiet, or maybe something's about to happen. So all this other stuff prevents them from understanding that this is the way in which they're processing. So for them to even question it assumes that they have a mental model, right? The way they believe things should work is quiet equals information processing.
Yeah.
And this is my point about collectivism and individualism. This is the talking that has to happen. This is very much in line with Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development. We process through talking. He calls it social cultural learning theory, and it's not a theory. They use theory to say this is kind of the principles. So this is what DeFore says, we learn by doing, right? So there is an active participatory element to collectivist learning. We apprentice. So the apprentice is next to the mentor, and that mentor, while they're doing it, they're talking. We can see this in the way chess masters train new chess players. They're not trying to figure it out. They're just trying to have an instructional conversation about something, right? That before the move, now they're going to talk about the move. There are a few ways in which white people, typically those from individualistic cultures and mostly Europeans, do that. But if you're wanting to be a leader in a school that's predominantly made up of people of color, then you are going to have to first get your physiology okay with that dynamic participatory way of being. Then secondly, you're going to have to just understand it better so that you know the pro-social from the you done gone off strip and you wouldn't do that in front of your grandma. Because one of the things I see white people do is they put it all in one bucket. Now some kid is doing something that nobody would be saying is okay, and they say, oh, that's just their culture. So now that also tells me you really haven't learned, because there's some stuff in collectivist culture, everything doesn't go. There are ways in which you're pro-social and you're being anti-social. And we know the difference. We're socialized into the difference. So this is where leaders have to understand. So even as teachers are coming into school, they can be that guide to help teachers who really don't understand this to understand it. How are they incorporating those ways of being into the ways parents are involved in the school? again, if you're asking parents to fit into, we're going to do it this, individualistic, Eurocentric way, then you're not going to get the best from parents in terms of really having a partnership, having them kind of feel comfortable in school. You're actually practicing the kind of educational trauma and triggering it that they may have experienced, right? And so again, decolonizing means that we have to bring in and mix and integrate those collectivist practice. Here's the last thing I'll say about that. This doesn't mean that we're talking all the time randomly out of what I teach teachers to do is everybody needs a variety of different talk structures. So I'm an introvert. Nobody would believe it, but I am. I need my quiet time.
Same here.
There's a way to process information. So not everything in your classroom is going to be talking, but you should have places where it's okay when we're doing something for you to be talking with your neighbors or other folk. But again, you're not disrupting. It's this low hum. We see it in Montessori classrooms. We see it in AP and higher honors classes. But we have a tendency to want to control that when it is in classrooms where the students are underperforming, dependent learners, and disproportionately Black and brown. So this is where we're reinforcing it. But from a collectivist standpoint, this is what you're talking about. That is a way of processing information.
Yeah. I want to once again put the book on the screen, folks. This is the author that we got on today, Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. You can go to Amazon right now and get your copy on your other device. Been a bestseller for the past 9 years. Get yourself a copy. But while I'm at it, I got another commercial break, my newest.
Yes,
Entity, protecting your leadership mindset, fervor, and authenticity. You can get them both on Amazon. This is the newest one. It's been out for about 2 weeks, I think. Get it to accompany this particular platform. We're winding down, Zaretta, but I got a couple more things for you. One of the things at the heart of your work, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, is your Ready for Rigor framework. And I want to isolate this word rigor for a second with an experience I had. I had a superintendent once. This is when this word rigor was really, a lot of things are these buzzwords: equity, growth mindset, and we can go on and on, right? So this word rigor was the word at that time, and this was around 2000, I want to say 8-ish, 9-ish, when I had this particular superintendent, and he pushed back on this word rigor. His thinking was, and this is not a criticism of him, his thinking, I'm just letting you know, his thinking was there's just multiple definitions of rigor, and rigor can't be measured. So therefore, rigor was not something that was being pursued at the highest level coming from the superintendent, because he didn't feel that it was something that was going to be beneficial. So then I look at your whole framework, which I've looked at several times because I've read the book and we've had the other interview, and rigor is significant in the work that you do. So you went on and created this Ready for Rigor framework. But before we get to the framework, I want to ask you, what is rigor?
Yeah, the important part of rigor is, and I'll kind of piggyback on what you were saying about this leader who was saying, it's just too many definitions, different ways to come, you can't measure it. Well, let's just go with the base understanding. If we're talking about getting kids to expand their intellectual capacity, this is what Dr. ASA Hilliard talked about in collaboration with Reuven Feuerstein. And they talked about this idea of cognitive mediation, that this is how all humans get smarter. That we have to grapple with things and their complexity. And as we start to better understand and meaning make, we actually expand our gray matter. A little side note, the reason the brain has those folds in it, the gray matter is all folded up. We typically think of that as a brain. That is what happens when you grapple with complexity, and the more complexity, the more dendrites, and it starts to fold over on itself. So they know if they ever look at a brain and doing an autopsy and it's smooth, then that person did not actually do a lot of learning. And this is what leads us to Alzheimer's and other stuff, the more networks. That's a little aside. But rigor is the intersection of two things. On one axis is instructional complexity and complexity of the content. But as that content complexity goes up, then student autonomy, the student's ability to be cognitively independent. And that's very different from just kind of executive function, study skills and ask 3 before me. This means that I can look at new content. I may not understand it, but I know the kind of mental operations and algorithm to actually process it, so I can go from confused to understanding, right? This is what meaning making is. So this is what schema building is. A lot of people are talking about knowledge building and the science of reading. That's what knowledge building is, and it's really important. So those two axes have to come together. You cannot get rigor if students are not growing in their ability to be cognitively independent and autonomous, meaning the teacher isn't over scaffolding the student through the lesson. And that in order to get more of that, then you have to adjust the complexity, and you have to do it slowly, right? Can't just from 0 to 100. And this is why over time we talk about learning progressions. And this is why information processing is the critical key. So that rigor is really about what Dr. ASA Hilliard and Rubenstein talked about in terms of being able to get the student to actually grow their own brain power. So all of these folks coming out of Project Zero at Harvard, that's what they're talking about. Making thinking visible, Ron Rickhart and his work, that's what they're thinking about. Making maker-centered learning, that's what they're thinking and talking about. They're talking about this ability to help the student actually create these permanent mental operations. Now, we don't usually talk about that when we talk about equity. And therein lies the problem, because that's what people who want to maintain these systems are talking about. So we want to really get to kind of the equity that we started this conversation with. You are going to have to help the student build their capacity to be cognitively independent students. That means you got to let go of a pedagogy of compliance. They've got to be able to read on their own over time. This is not just about thinking and talking. They may be highly intelligent, but if they have to read, they're not able to access the content and therefore think and talk about it. So that is what rigor is, right? And there are a variety of ways to come at it, but it still is going to have those two components, just like a car. We've got a variety of cars, but they still actually drive on the same principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the Ready for Rigor framework, I had written a note to myself. I said it probably takes you more than a full day to fully exhaust that framework. I would think that if you wanted to do justice to it with a group, with an audience, you probably couldn't do it all in one day, I would think, just based on all that's there. What I want to do, I just want to make the audience aware of the 4 strands, which are awareness, learning partnerships, information processing community, and learners and learning environment. And I highlighted here, and this is for the sake of the audience here, this awareness strand under this Ready for Rigor framework comprises: understand the 3 levels of culture, recognize cultural archetypes of individualism and collectivism, understand how the brain learns, which is very significant, acknowledge the socio-political context around race and language, know and own your cultural lens, recognize your brain's triggers around race and culture, and broaden your interpretation of culturally and linguistic diverse students' learning behaviors. Now, I got overzealous and I got a zillion questions I wrote regarding those indicators, but I'm not going to ask them all of you. But I got about 2 or 3 I want to ask, and that'll take us right to the end. Right. So y'all on the call here, y'all stay with us here. Oh, Melissa Jones Chuno, I'm on page 17. We doing Bible studies, Zaretta. Right. I'm on page 17, chapter 1, verse. Right. So page 17, and you'll see the whole framework right there. And the framework is powerful, but then the book pretty much comprises the framework. Here we go. So with that, Zaretta, those 3 levels of culture, talk to us about what they are and why they matter in the classroom. And if you could even talk about the implications for the leader.
Yeah, I think the awareness quadrant of the Ready for Rigor framework is typically where I see people start. And typically they start and stay with implicit bias. So you just read all those bullets off and it doesn't say implicit bias words anywhere. So people insert that because that's the mental model they're bringing to it versus the things that I've talked about, right? And I typically ask people not to start there. I ask them to start with student learning partnerships. And then you'll back into that so that you then have to think about who do I need to be to actually create this kind of learning partnership? Because if people try to do it in a linear way, you're never going to get to the information processing. Because like you said, it takes too long. Instead, it's a braid, just like people talk about Scarborough's rope when we talk about the science of reading and braiding those things together. In culturally responsive teaching, you're doing the same thing. But I also always tell them to start thinking about what does the information processing look like at my school or in my classroom. If students are the unit of change, how am I in a partnership with them? And then back into who do I need to be in order to do that? The circle is part of what people typically don't get to, right? How am I having an instructional conversation? So I'm coaching students, and how do I give them wise feedback so they understand how to improve their own performance? So the quadrant bullets and the 3 levels of culture are just simply so that you can start understanding the kind of schema that the students will have laid down. So the shallow part of those 3 layers is really the important part, right? When we talk about culture tree, we're talking about how are we understanding the hidden rules of interaction, hidden rules of schema building, so that we're doing that. And so being able to really understand, this is the nurture culture we're talking about from 0 to about 7 is how our brain wires itself. And then anything after that, we're layering on. It's just an addition. It's kind of another variation, but that how we were with our mother and our father and our aunties and our extended family, that is what we come to school with, and we can expand in terms of cultural interpretations. But we'll always go back to that root in terms of kind of our cultural orientation. So I think the shallow culture is where people have a tendency not to really understand and build on that. And so again, the 3 levels of culture are right there in culture tree. And this is to your point about watching something like Black Panther. The only way you can expand that is kind of to widen your aperture. You have to know how you've interpreted culture, and a lot of educators don't. Whether they are white, even as those of us who are of color, who have kind of adopted a more individualistic path to success, we have to know how are we integrating that, not just to pathologize something that looks different. So that's the whole thing for the leader, I think. So again, awareness isn't leader. We need, I'm the leader. I'm going to take you through implicit bias training. We are going to have to back into that. I say that there are 3 layers before, not 3 layers, 3 moves before we get to that. Let's look at our students. Are we in partnership with our students? How do we know that? Because self-report is 100%. Well, we just need to be collecting some data. Watch for 2 weeks. And then have people come back like, oh, snap. What assumptions did you make about that kid or that behavior? That's why I put the mindful reflection protocol in there. It's a protocol to help people actually take that step back. Otherwise, what happens is we start to misinterpret, these behaviors. And then again, we just it's just about implicit bias. So we're really about, expanding and widening your aperture when we're talking about learning about those 3 layers of culture. But that shallow culture in the middle, not shallow because it's less than, shallow because it's just below the surface.
I got 2 more for you.
Yeah.
These are coming out of the framework. I'm kind of building on something you said. I'm asking you, what can a leader do toward creating a safe space amongst staff, not only knowing and owning their cultural lens, as you worded, but being able to share in a courageous conversational setting amongst staff.
Yeah.
Right. So I own it. I know it. I own it. But can I talk about it?
Absolutely. And I think, again, you got to back into it. So if you don't understand, there's a book actually called The Human Side of Change, right? And this is what leaders have to do. And what I don't find often is people actually understand that. Like, how do I help people actually take up new ideas? How do I help them shift their mental model? And how do I help them kind of calm their body so that they actually can be in that conversation? So this is one of the books I really like. This is called Belonging by Susie Weiss. And it really talks about this. How do you create these 9 moments of belonging that are going to set that psychologically safe environment up, right? So again, helping people kind of come together so that they feel heard. Story is number 1. There's the cycle of socialization. Have people do this inner work and then share it using protocols, meaning it is low stakes versus kind of we're all going to be in a room and now you're just supposed to talk about implicit bias. Small groups that then move into kind of sharing in larger groups, and then picking out a few things in terms of kind of what are the things we would want to be true? How do we understand what's behind this? Having them read articles and talk about it in small pods and then come back together. I think the way in which a leader does that has to be much more thoughtful about creating that versus we're just going to get everybody to the PD and we're going to supposedly make it a brave space. Because what ends up happening is you can be triggering people of color who've gone through the same traumas, educational traumas, and then you have white people who, again, might say, well, why do we have to make it a black and white thing? All kids deserve this, when we know the data tells us otherwise. So again, the leader has to be thoughtful about how you create the spaces, but how you bring people into the spaces. Meaning we all could be in the space, but start with story. Start with self. Don't start with things that are charged. Don't start with racial politics, right? Because now we're just going to have people take sides and it's just not going to be resolved. And people are going to leave, they're going to grin and skin, and then they're going to leave talking in the parking lot.
You got to know how to read the room.
Well, more importantly, you need to know how to set up the room.
Yeah.
It's not just about reading I got everybody in one big room. If you're not using protocols, if you're not using story, you got to know how to use that to leverage it to get where you want. But if you don't know where you're going, you don't know where people are, you don't know the best tools to use. So leaders also need to know about these tools.
And I think that word you just used, leverage, I think that's the operative word.
Yes.
And critical. Got one more for you, and that's just, what are your final thoughts to, particularly to our APs out here who are watching this morning as it relates to just sustaining a culturally responsive learning environment?
I think the main thing for them to do is to, again, focus on the instruction, focus on the responsive. What will we do when they don't learn it? What will we do to move them out of their confusion? How do we help them move toward letting go of dependent learning behaviors and embracing cognitively independent? I haven't mentioned race in any one of those things, but when I give those skills to students, that leads to the kind of liberatory education that we knew reading did for an enslaved person. You weren't going to end slavery, but you darn sure we're going to give people the liberatory tools where they can liberate themselves. All we need to do is go back to what Frederick Douglass did. Right? We see this over and over again. So this is why the focus on that instruction core, helping students become good information processors, making the content relevant so it becomes intellectually curious. But that is a means to an end. So again, focus on instruction, not just giving more of the same, but using the science of learning for the purpose of equity.
Love it. Hey, before we close out, let's go to those BAM impact questions. I don't know if we did this on that other channel I have, but 20 questions.
Yeah.
1 word answer or 1 sentence, nothing over a sentence. Here we go. Is education on the right path for underserved children in America?
No.
Are you optimistic about the educational prospects for the masses of Black and brown students in America?
Hell yes.
Can true equity occur in America's schools for Black, brown, and other underserved students?
Through public institutions, possibly. But when we educate ourselves and we don't do that for others, definitely.
Does Zaretta Hammond's work contribute to the progress we desperately need?
I hope so, God willing.
If you could do a reset on your life, would your line of work be different or the same?
It would be the same.
Why do you continue to do this work?
Honestly, it's the mission God gave me. I don't know what else I would do, but that's the mission. Until I'm not breathing anymore, that's the mission.
What fires you up particularly within the work that you do?
Instruction and literacy. I mean, because reading is the fastest way to grow our intelligence, just the wiring of the brain to read, whether you ever read or not, and then the ability to actually take in new information. I grew up in a library, and you can assign yourself. No one has to keep knowledge from you when you can read.
What do you absolutely love about the work you do?
Just with teachers, when they're willing to kind of lean in and get in the learning pit and have their own productive struggle and stay with it. And when they come out on the other side, they're kind of bitching and moaning when they're in there. But when they get on the side, they were like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah. So that gives me such satisfaction. Some people don't make it out of the pit. They can't get in the pit. I'm sorry for those people. God's watching over them. But those teachers that are with me and we get in the pit, they get to the other side, their children, their students are going to be gifted with that new knowledge that teacher brings.
What do you dislike about the work you do?
Kind of the district hierarchy that we put ourselves in for quick results.
What has been your greatest victory in this work thus far?
Teaching children to read and teaching their parents how to teach their own children to read.
What was your greatest mistake in this work thus far?
Thinking that districts are ready to take it up willingly.
What has been your greatest challenge in this work?
Thinking that districts were ready to take it up willingly.
Who inspires you in this work?
Oh, I see so many young folks coming out, and with their PhDs or, starting to do the work. I really want to push people to get beyond the, trite, but there's some young folks that are cutting a path and taking up the work. I really appreciate seeing them.
What are you reading right now? Book, article?
I'm writing, so I'm reading a whole lot of things, but two, because I knew you were going to ask me this. One is The Price of Nice. This book is about this whole idea of Midwest nice, and we just, we want to, preserve the self-esteem of kids. APs, you need to read that book. The other is In Search of Deeper Learning by Joe Mehta, and he has an article, The Grammar of Schooling. APs need to be reading that because he talks about this pedagogy of compliance as the grammar of schooling. And here he talks about, well, where is their deeper learning? We want all that rigor, but he did a 2-year exhaustive ethnographic study, and it's some really chilling conclusions they come to. The other is Scripting the Moves, about charter schools and a pedagogy of compliance that they're perpetuating. Not all of them, but a good portion.
I understand. So you gave us a recommendation, so I can skip that one. What do you want to accomplish that you haven't accomplished yet?
Writing more books.
Are you satisfied with where you are now professionally?
No.
What could you say?
Write more books.
There you go. What could you say to a viewer out there who continues to face closed doors?
Assign yourself. Closed doors just means there, is a window open. There's some other way. People of color have never been given an open door. Either going to kick the door, or you're going to go make another door, build your own building. But you have to assign yourself. Don't just sit down.
What could you say to a viewer out there who's lost their fire?
You got to figure out and follow your intellectual curiosity. And sometimes fires go out. Go find it. And maybe it's not in education. And that's cool too. And
lastly, if Zaretta Hammond was a word in a dictionary, what would be your definition?
Tenacious.
Tenacious. I love it. Hey, y'all, if the presentation, if the conversation resonated with you, if you feel you benefited from it, if you enjoyed it, if it was good, let us know. Give us those emojis as you do every week. Those of you who are regulars with us, you already know the process. Those of you who may be new, just whatever your favorite emoji is, just put it up there. That's the applause that we give our guest. And then since I'm not home, I bring my little miniature bat. I don't have my big Louisville Slugger. Got my little miniature joint, and you hit a grand slam. In fact, every time you came to bat, you hit a grand slam. So 16 runs in. Excellent, man. This was just great stuff. I appreciate it. I skipped so many questions. There's so much that you could talk about to just benefit the people out here. But let them know how they can reach you, to ask you questions, to book you, to get their hands on this. Floor is yours.
Absolutely. So the main way to stay in touch with me is to get my newsletter, crtinthebrain.com, and just sign up for that. It comes out. I do monthly webinars. I just had a meetup for a webinar I'd done for somebody else. And just because we are in this together, that's one of the best ways. The other way is follow me on Twitter. And then, there I usually will tell people how they can follow up. And I'm always trying to be in conversation. It takes a village to do this. I am not thinking that I'm the Pied Piper. We need to be shoulder to shoulder. Again, boots on the ground. This is who's walking point. We got to rotate that. So I'm here for that. And those are the two best ways to find me.
Love it. Love it. Folks, I love everything you're putting in those comments too. They're getting a lot of accolades, a lot of emojis. So Zaretta, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing, helping. Thank you for just being a part of this platform today while I'm out here in Cancun chilling. Right.
So you keep chilling, taking care of yourself, because we need you strong and back at it. So appreciate all that you do, and all the leaders are holding it down. Absolutely. I'm glad I can be of support.
I appreciate that. Hey, folks, glad you're here. Let me go through my rundown, and then we'll be out. Zaretta, stay with me when I go off. All right. Next week, I told you at the beginning, those of you who were with me at the beginning, we are on week number 162. We have Ohio State University professor, gifted and talented specialist, prolific writer, Dr. Donna Ford. So she'll be with us next Saturday at 10:55. I think I'll be home. I'm not sure. I think I am. Every Saturday morning, Facebook Live, Sean Hurt, 10 o'clock. Create and Educate with Dr. Sheikah Houston and Dr. Tammy Taylor, the two doctors, at 10:30. Sunday night at 7 Eastern, Unlock the Middle, Josh Tovar, Dean Packard. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, the Village Leadership Group with Dr. Roz Gaskins and Coach Williams, 6 o'clock. Join me at the School Leadership Institute in Charlotte, July 11 and 12 from 9 to 4 both days. Go to principalkafele.com, scroll down to the announcements, register, and I'll see you in Charlotte. Join me at the Black Educators Rock Conference, July 13 through 16. Again, 13 through 16, 4 big days. I'll be there the 15th and the 16th, but join us as a conference the entire time. Just go to the Black Educators Rock website. Melissa, I know you're on here. Dr. Chester, put that website. I think it's blackeducatorsrock.org, and then just go there and register. And we hope to see you in Jacksonville. I know about all the travel advisories coming from the NAACP about Florida and all that, but we're going to be talking about the stuff that needs to be talked about in Florida, right? So don't worry about that. We'll all be in the one place, and we're going to have a great time learning from one another. So join us in Jacksonville. One more time, my newest, the Assistant Principal Identity. Get your copy at Amazon. Just go ahead right now with your other device, get your copy, get it in hand, and you will have it, right? Let me put Dr. Melissa Chester, that's our president, just put it up here, rockconference.org. I need to memorize that, Doc. I know I got too much on my mind, but rockconference.org. We want to see you in Jacksonville, July 13 through 16. Join me on Alexa every morning. Just say, Alexa, open ASCD morning messages, and there's my voice going to be there giving you something every day. And then make sure you subscribe to the Virtual AP Leadership Academy YouTube channel. Thank you to the 18,000 subscribers that we have. My goal is 20,000. And then like and follow the Virtual AP Leadership Academy Facebook page. Other than that, your diet is important, your exercise is important, and your COVID precautions continue to be important. I rock that mask on planes, man. I don't do the planes without the mask anymore, y'all. So make sure you just taking care of yourself. That's the bottom line. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will see you next Saturday at 10:55. Other than that, have a great week. Have an extraordinary week. Have your best week yet. Peace. Peace. Thumbs up. Cock that fist back. Count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Bam! I'll see y'all next Saturday. Be safe, y'all, and I'll see you then.